What's up, Oasis?
Hey, guys.
Hello. Hey, Ben is not here. He's lame.
He wouldn't mind that you said that, so I think that's
No,
okay.
he probably won't even hear it.
No, he is an avid consumer of Oasis content when he's not present. He listens to a lot of our sermons. I don't know if you know that, but he is listening.
All right.
So he might dabble.
But hey, we got Jaena filling in.
Mm-hmm.
We're super excited.
And for the OGs, Jaena used to be here week in, week out. She was on the grind for the first. I don't even remember. I asked this the other time. When did we start over?
Yeah, when did we start doing this?
It was over 100 because we had our 100 party.
Yeah.
Remember? Mm-hmm. And the whole room smelled like rancid parties.
From those party poppers.
Those party poppers, and then they just reeked and it smelled terrible. But
yeah,
I don't remember how many we did. Over 100. And now we're on 40 already.
Yeah.
And did you start with one?
Yes.
Wow.
Okay.
It's impressive.
That's crazy.
So
we should start over again next year.
Every time you get to 100, you start over.
I don't
or
like
whatever
that.
the random number was.
Yeah. So last week we talked about marriage, and this week we're pivoting a little bit to talk about just what it's like to be single and just some of the challenges our community faces, even if you're in a dating relationship, some of the pressures you might feel before you get married. But before we dive in, I have a question for you guys. What is your favorite thing to do when you're alone?
Am I going first?
Sure, why not?
We're going like boring real answers or like fun things?
Give me a little bit of both.
Okay. I mean, realistically, the thing I do all my time when I'm not at work is alone most of the time, unless I'm hanging out with friends.
You got Lucy?
Single. I have Lucy, my dog.
Yeah.
She's not very interesting. So it's just like reading. It's kind of boring. But I like to do crafts too. I recently have wanted to get into making candles.
Oh, okay.
But like getting weird, quirky jars from thrift stores and making candles.
That's
so like
a cool
recently
idea.
I found a little glass. It's this big, but it looks like a diner cup.
Yeah.
So I made a candle out of it. Or like I have some ceramic clogs, like Dutch clogs, made candles.
See, and that I think, maybe not a whole business, maybe. I don't know. You do what you want.
Who knows?
But really cool gifts.
Yeah.
If you like made them and then that you started giving people candles as gifts,
And
but
they're,
instead
like,
they were
weird
unique.
jars,
Like that's
yeah.
a one-on-one candle.
Yeah.
Like I like getting candles as gift, but that would be like a whole nother.
Yeah.
I like it.
So
I love
we'll
it.
see what happens with
Very
it.
cool.
I just imagine Jaena with like a room in her house and it's like Serenity by Jason.
Yeah.
You can smell Jaena's house before you're like even close to it.
So
What do you do?
maybe.
I like to cook, but like I'm not a great cook, and so it's just always eventful. Like I don't really know how to chop anything. I just make it up as I go. I set off the fire alarm a couple days ago. I actually planned this whole entire sermon introduction making fun of people that can't cook, and then over that weekend I set off the fire
And
alarm.
the Lord
making
was like,
soup,
bam.
and I said, "Not anymore."
That's humility
Can't
right
make
there.
fun of other people.
I don't know. For me, I honestly, like my honest answer is we have Fridays as pastors are typically our Saturdays. And so my wife usually has worked on Fridays. She's had 12 weeks of maternity leave. So it doesn't feel like I've had alone time in 12 weeks. But prior to that, I did chores. I like working with my hands. Most of what we do as pastors is very intellectual. It's a lot of mind stimulation. You're thinking, you're praying, you're talking with people. And so when I have a chance to totally like reorient myself and do something very tangible with my hands, I like doing hand projects like building something or cleaning something, or I just really want to be active and moving around on my Fridays. So like I'll vacuum and I'll dust and I'll mop and I'll do the dishes and I'll do laundry. Like, and Allie comes home, she's like, why'd you do all? I just like, I don't know, it's weird. I'm kind of
like
backwards, but that's what I literally like doing. And I put in, like, I'm not like weird about it. I'm not doing it silent. Totally. Crushing audiobooks. Sometimes I like carry her on my laptop and I'm like watching a TV show. Like, I'm like doing laundry and it's like,
The laptop.
yeah, the whole laptop. Like my 18-inch MacBook is me. Because sometimes the phone's so small. Depends on the show. Sometimes I feel like you can watch a show, you don't even need the screen.
That's true.
You can just listen to it and you're good to go. But every once in a while, you need all of the screen. So yeah, I'm just like carrying around my laptop, and that's what I do.
Yeah, we're talking about singleness and somewhat into dating a little bit today. But this is kind of a different podcast for us. Usually we're talking about like, theological things. But I think this is really still a place where God is forming us and where we have opportunities to share like what God's doing in our life. But I also think that this is just a season of life that if you're in it, that's just very confusing and very overwhelming just with the horde of information being thrown at you, and even just the horde of questions and experiences that were going in. And so if you're listening, and if you're someone that, you know, desires marriage, but you're not at that point yet, this is kind of for you. And our goal with this is to name the challenges and experiences of this season of life, but also to make sure that we're still clinging to hope in it. And I think some of my favorite preachers have been ones that are able to help me identify the season that I'm in, because sometimes I don't recognize that there are things that are going on. But when I can hear someone and they're like naming something that's going on, I was like, oh, that makes so much more sense now. And then they just help me see the hope in it. And that's kind of our goal for today.
That's good. Insightfulness is such a gift. Help me to see something I can't see myself.
Yeah.
Like, huge. And I want to start, even before you get into too much content, I think when we have a marriage conversation, you can tell, I talked about in culture how we still kind of value long marriages. And so you're like, how do I get a mentor or a mentor marriage couple who's been married 20, 30, 40 years? I want to sit and I want to learn, how do they tick and how do they, or Ben, he's been married 15 years. How did they do it, right? But the flip side of that is when you come to a singleness conversation, I don't think we bring the same lens.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think we go to people who it's like, hey, you're single and you've been single and you're processing and you're thinking about it, and I value what you have to say, even though I'm in singleness. Like, I think our culture can sometimes, we'll talk about that, wear that as a badge of shame. And so then we don't go to the resources in the same way we tap into other resources. So even as we start this, both of you are at the table single, unless something's changed.
No. No. we don't talk about it.
Well, this is what we do. She's going to hang out a lot in the Walmart produce area. That's kind of the spot that we've prophetically said.
That's where she's going to meet
That podcast hasn't even come out yet. And last week I went to Aldi in Sioux Falls because I was terrified.
Well, I mean, don't let fear rule you. Let faith be the symptom of the day.
You'll have a crazy story if that actually happens.
I know, seriously. I'm praying for it. Why not? But in that, like, where
am I going to meet my husband?
I don't know. I'm not in.
Just kidding.
I'm not in the spirit in the same way today. But like, I think that's what's beautiful about being able to have this conversation. Yes, we don't have Ben here, but we have Jaena here, who's going to be a powerful voice to speak in this conversation as someone who's in it. You're walking it, you're experiencing it, and you've got great wisdom here. So I would tell you, I'm going to try, this is really hard for me, to be a little bit more silent and let you two kind of carry most of the conversation, because you're the two who are processing it and asking the realest of questions. So with that, back to you.
Cool. But I just want to start with like how God sees singleness and sees this season of life. That's how we did the marriage one. We started with, what is God's view of this? Same with singleness. It is a good gift. You can read in 1 Corinthians 7, it is Paul talking about how he just wishes everybody could be single, which is a crazy statement. He's like, I guess you can get married if like you just can't handle yourself anymore. Fine, get married. But I wish you would stay single, because there are just so many things that God can do through a person who is single, with their increased flexibility, both with time and with like relational stuff. Like Jaena and I both live hours away from our family, and Jaena and I can also just like leave and go visit our family a lot easier than some of the other people here on staff. But yeah, I think we also see like it's an undivided concern from God, and so like just a freedom first to worship Him, and then out of that serve.
Yeah, I mean, 1 Corinthians 7 is a powerful text. Like, anybody walking through singleness, you can hear us talk about it, but I just go read it.
Yeah.
Read it, sit in it. But the language of a gift, it's like, where do I return this? You know?
Yeah, I didn't want this
Yeah,
gift.
it's like, how quickly can I re-gift this to someone else, because it's not the gift for me. But that's what Paul calls it.
Yeah.
And I've heard people try to discredit sometimes 1 Corinthians 7, or they'll call it contextualizing it, that Paul had such a narrow time view of when maybe Jesus was coming back. And so he put temporary restrictions on the people to remain in singleness, because if Jesus was coming back soon, as they thought, and they thought soon meant really imminent, like within their lifetime, then why would you waste time being married if you could devote with the next 30 years directly? But I don't think the way that God has oriented the scriptures and the way he's put it together, that he put time constraints on it like that. The word that Paul spoke to this community in Corinthians is still a word for us today. Singleness is still a gift.
And I think too, like, this passage forces us to like back up a little bit and just wrestle with God about what our true purpose is in being created. Like, our true purpose in being a created person is to worship Him, and then to go out and help other people worship Him. And I think a lot of times what can get really suffocating in conversations about marriage and dating is that we feel like our purpose can only be like having a family. And so then when we read that this is a good gift, we're like, well, I don't have a family, and so this isn't right. But like, the goodness of the gift is that you get to live into your created purpose without as many barriers competing for it.
Yeah. And it frees you up for more responsibility in the kingdom, to use your time, to use your gifts and your skills without any hindrance in some ways. I think I've seen that really personally in my life, that there are a lot of ministry things that God asked me to do that I think realistically, if I looked at them, I would not have been able to do if I'd had a spouse to consider, or a spouse to devote time to, or a relationship to give energy and emotional attention to, or kids. Like, that's a whole other layer.
Preach.
Yeah, Brennan knows.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a reality of, like, especially in the last couple of years, my entire life has been solely devoted to serving God's kingdom in the different ways that God's asked. And there haven't been as many distractions, feels like a terrible word, but other things to consider and give time and energy to, that was the only thing. Yeah. And I think there are things that God was able to do. And I think that he blessed because I was able to do that.
So good. And I don't want to say this as like a pros cons things, because there's benefits to both.
Yeah,
but when I had a kid, like I told my supervisor, I said, I'm functioning at 60% capacity. I can give you 60% of what I could give you a month ago. And like, that was my reality. Now I'm getting closer. But I don't know if I'll ever be back at 100.
Yeah.
Right. What I was able to give when I was just a married person, or if I was just like, it changes. And so you're spot on there. Like you just, we have to recognize some of that.
Can I ask you, so like when you look back on the past couple of years and you consider like, man, I've gotten to do like all of these things for God, but like, there's also some things that are left unfulfilled. Like, what are some of the emotions that are behind that?
Yeah. I think in the midst of God doing a lot of amazing things ministry-wise, the greatest place that Satan tried to attack when God was moving was my singleness, and was how I felt about that and my emotions, because I think he knew that being a person who is single but would love to not be single, would love to be married and have a family and do those things, like, I think Satan knew that that's something he could easily distract me with. And so, I mean, feelings of the loneliness rises up, feelings of just like doubt and questioning, like, who am I? Am I a good enough person that someone could even love me? Or am I single because nobody does? So lots of emotions for sure.
But then when you look back on like how you got to participate in God's kingdom, and like I think you can even see that it's different than your other peers. Like, what are some of the emotions that go with that as well?
Like, in good or bad ways? Like,
good. I think what I hear from you is like celebrating and appreciating what God's been able to do in you, but also like a sense that like there's still grief of like some things that are still unmet.
Yeah. Well, I think in anything we do, there is always a benefit and a loss. Like, in any decision you make, there's something you step into, but there's also something you can't do because of that. Can't do or can't experience or can't be a part of. Like, that's just the reality of functioning as human beings. We're finite and we're limited in time. And so whatever decision you make, there's something you're saying no to. And I think that there are definitely moments when the negative emotions outweighed the positive. But even as I look back on the ministry that God's allowed me to do in the last almost 7 years at Grace Point, like, I could not have imagined what he was going to let me be a part of. And I recognized that the seasons where I was more concerned with finding a spouse or more concerned with my singleness than ministry, that my attention was distracted. And so my effectiveness or my willingness to be used was lower. And so I think that I don't even know if I'm answering your question anymore.
No, you are.
I think that in that, I mean, they always say everything's 20/20, and it's always when you look back that you're able to see both the good and the bad more realistically than in the moment. But I think that now in this place, I have a greater appreciation for being single than even I did last year. And that's even more than the year before that. And the more, like, the longer that I'm in it and the more I've gotten to see what God can do because of just my freedom in that area of life has just, I think, been really encouraging. And for me, that's a positive emotion because I know that my ultimate purpose is to glorify God. And so while, yes, there's something I'm missing out on and there is a grieving in that, and like maybe someday I will get married and have kids and I'll be like, oh, I wish I had done this sooner. But the reality is, like, God has done amazing things, and I'm just thankful to get to be a part of that.
There was a quote our supervisor sent us earlier this week, Soren Kierkegaard. I'm so bad at names, so thank you for bailing me out. But he said, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. And I think that fits so well with what you just said. Like, as you look back, you understand what God was doing and why he had that. And yet, you can only go forward with your life. And so how do these things frame each other? How does what you've understood then frame the way you move? It's so good, so beautiful.
Yeah.
That was
Do you
awesome.
do you answer any different or add any?
Yeah.
Like, what about you? I mean, your singleness has played huge role in your life in
Yeah.
the last couple of years.
I agree with Jaena. Like, I would not be here if I wasn't single. I had been living in Colorado, and then within like 2 weeks, somehow like lost my job, had to move back home with my parents, and then like seriously could not move across the country multiple times if I was married. And I think too, just like the schedule of a pastor, especially someone who does youth ministry or even college ministry, it's a lot of like weird nights.
Weird hours.
Like,
yeah.
like I was like, I could never be like a parent right now. Like, like that wouldn't even work.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think like logistically, it makes a lot of sense. I think even just like having Jaena on staff has been super helpful because she's someone who's a little bit like, you're not like, I'm not saying you're old or anything, but like you're just
But I'm
like
older
a
than
couple,
you.
like
Yeah.
you're a couple years
I'm
older
okay.
than me.
I'm at peace with that.
But like, I think you just model singleness really well and a contentment and still a purpose in it. And so like when I read 1 Corinthians 7 and Paul is saying it's a really great gift and I wish everybody was unmarried, there are still times in my life where I was like, how is this even in the Bible? Like this sucks.
Can I just rip out that one page?
I was like, I
Can we
reviewed
white that
this.
out?
But then like even just hearing you talk, like you have seen God's faithfulness through what Paul's saying. And you're saying like yeah, like there's still moments and areas where like there's a desire that's unmet, but like I believe so strongly in what God's done in my life that I never want to give that up. And I think I've been able to see glimpses of that in my own testimony. But I mean, like, I'm also excited to be in a season where this is the first time I've lived somewhere longer than a year in like 6 years. And though that's terrifying of like, oh my gosh, like what happens if I don't move again? Or like I don't know, that's terrifying, but it's like, man, like I actually get to settle down and build roots and like find community and live and just like be. And there's a beauty in what God's been doing in that and singleness. So
I love it.
Yeah.
One of the things that Paul is alluding to, and I think both of you have said it in your own testimonies here, but how Christ becomes magnified in singleness and how his provision and just purpose in your life is sufficient in the midst of singleness. Talk to me a little bit about that of like, yes, there's the cultural pressures and we'll get into all of that, but what does it look like to like have Christ in the midst of your singleness?
Yeah. I think it's easy to trust in other people. So I think, and I'm not married, so I can't speak to this, but so maybe you can. But when you have a spouse, there are things that you rely on your spouse for. And when you don't have a spouse, it doesn't mean those things don't exist. So if my car breaks down, whereas a married person might go to their spouse and say, hey, I need help with this, I have to say, how do I figure this out on my own? And like, that's just a little example. But in everything, like, there's no one there to challenge me to pray every night. So I have to like be my own motivation to do that. Or I just have to trust in the Lord. I think I don't want to say bigger ways than married people because that doesn't feel fair to married people, but there's no one else there to help in that. It's just you. Yeah. And so I think that for me, it's been, I also hate the language of like dating Jesus, but like that's the only support in my life outside of friendships, like in like a really intimate way that I have. Yeah. And so I think that to me is just elevated a little bit more.
And so in a way you see him show up in those spaces really tangibly where like for me, I don't have to rely as diligently in those same spaces oftentimes. That's good. What about for you?
I think for me, I'm really good at trying to be validated by other people.
That's good.
And so I'm still learning. But part of like trusting God in that is just like remembering that like I'm still chosen. And I think one of the cultural pressures, like you read any book, any movie, like doesn't matter what you're watching, there's a sense in which like two people find each other and choose each other. And so I think as someone who's single, it can be really easy to go down the wormhole of like, well, why am I not enough? Even like as like this has been elevated in the past year, just like in the process of getting ordained this summer and like becoming like a minister and like another layer of like, that's kind of weird when you're like looking to date someone. They're like, you don't want to date an ordained pastor
in
the
the
Wesleyan Church.
Reverend Emily Kaufman.
But just remembering that like I am already chosen and I am already loved. And even if I was to find someone that chose and loved me, it would still never be enough compared to what like God has for me. Like they are still a fallen human person. And so they're still going to fail me. And so it's been like a daily reminder and like even just a challenge to find like my worth not in what I can produce or what I do, but in the fact that like God just loves me enough and that's enough.
I'm prepping this message for a youth event Jaena and I are going to help do. And it hinges on this idea of what is love, how do we believe love, and how do we know what love is? And one of the ways that like our culture has framed this is that it's idolized love in a way that's like so corrosive to the actual human experience. And so then singleness feels like a lack of love, where I see some of the beauty in this of like, you get to learn Christ's love for you is enough. Like when you read 1 John 4, and it's like, man, I don't have that person that God has provided for me to experience that unconditional love in a marriage setting. But I get to learn that God's love is still enough. And in a culture that wants to pervert love, like what a redemptive experience to be able to understand it in a way so deeply, hopefully, right? That's the goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's keep going into maybe some of these, the challenges. Yeah. I think one, just overall discouragement, especially if you are someone in the church. There are like 40% of the church is single. That goes from like young adult to an old person who's like widowed. Of that 40%, only 30% are like single young adult men. The other 70 are like the women. And so if you're a female coming into church, you just already come in and you look in the room and you're just visually discouraged. I think too, we have a lack of community. We feel misunderstood. Even if you have a lot of friends, your friends might all be dating and you're like the third wheel consistently, or even just like the comparison trap of when we come into Oasis, especially after breaks, you're watching hundreds of people navigating the same life transition. And you might not have navigated that transition. And so you kind of feel alone and left out. Are there any other things that like stick out to you as like being discouraging or even isolating in that?
Yeah, the dating pool one is really interesting for sure.
Speak to that. What do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, as a Christian person, like who wants to follow the Lord and wants to be in a Christian marriage, like you want someone who isn't equally yoked. And so knowing those statistics of like where you could find someone seems really small. I think I feel that more now than when I started. When I first started at Grace Point, I had just graduated from college. So there was still this hope of like, oh, I'm going to a college town. Maybe I'll meet like a master's student or something.
Yeah.
And now being like, 10 years older than college freshmen, it's like, okay, that's not a viable option at all. And so just seeing the opportunities of potential options dwindle can be really discouraging.
So then how do you navigate that? Because that's the conversation I think I try to push single people in more now than I would have 2 years ago. Maybe 4 years ago. Like COVID was the time that really, I think, changed some of this. Because prior, I think in singleness, we had to say, we have to understand why it's a gift. And you still do. But at the same time, if it's a gift, you aren't desiring. If God's put a different desire in you, how do we pursue that which is in our heart? Like how do we set it aside for the Lord? How do we sanctify it? How do we make it holy? How do we make sure it's a righteous desire? And then how do we pursue it when this is also a reality that it's like, I don't know if there's enough fish in the sea. Like that's So then how do you like? Because then I think you fall into. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but you fall into like it's hopeless, and then you give up, and that desire in your heart just grows bitter. Like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah. I have thoughts, but I've been talking a lot. So if you have
this is actually another challenge that our community faces. I call it like the internal pressure of like, there are things that you're looking for and then like you don't find it at all and you're trying to reconcile the two. I think for me, like it's one, lowering my expectations on what I expect from an interaction from someone. It's like being willing to say yes, like to go on a date. Now, there are times where you're allowed to say no. When someone asks you, you do not have to say yes. Yeah. But like I've had friends set me up before. It's gone terrible a lot of times. It's gone great sometimes. But like a willingness to try, I think like the thing you shouldn't do as a single person is to just like never try, because then you're never going to actually find someone. But like are there people that have connections? Like dating apps are popular. Like you find what you're looking for in them. They're not always great. Like how you use it, be wise with it. But yeah, I think figure out a way to try, put yourself out there. It's risky. It's hard. It's vulnerable, but like you got to try.
Yeah, it's real. Oh, I had a thought and I lost it.
I'll ask a question. Maybe it'll come back to you. I think that whole conversation adds another layer of complexity being females at the table, because there is a nomer in the church that the men lead the family. the men lead relationship, and while we would agree with that Ephesians 5 interpretation, like how does that look in dating as females who are listening that saying, I'm single, there's less men than I would ever begin to imagine, and I have to just sit and wait for a male to pursue me because that's what I want in a husband, because I want them to be forthright, I want them to lead. Like, how do you navigate some of that?
Yeah, that's a common like thing that I think a lot of males like to communicate of like, oh, you don't want to be the one to initiate because what you allow him to do initially is what he's going to, like, if you allow your man to be passive and you take the, then that's what you're getting. But I don't think that's true. I think an initial interaction, there's no pressure on that. Now, if you start seeing someone and you're dating and you're constantly the one who's initiating and you allow him to be passive, then you step into that. But an initial, like, expression of interest or just like making the first move, that doesn't equate that you have a passive man. It's what you allow as you continue to get to know that person. So I think, I always encourage people, and I try to do it too myself, like, if you're interested, voice that interest. You lose nothing. If they say no, they're not interested. Okay, you've wasted no time thinking about it.
You actually gained the clarity of not knowing.
Clarity. And sometimes I should probably take my own advice, but
but part of it is, for me, I never want to point the finger at women and be like, oh, you're sliding into DMs, whatever. I think when that happens and it goes poorly, I think it's more the insecurity of man that's unwilling to handle or have expectations set for a relationship, right? So a girl slides into a guy's DM, he decides to pursue it. All of a sudden they've been dating for a while and he's still being passive. That says more about the man than it does the woman. And so I'm always like, bro, you got to be a better man of God than, oh, she should have never hit you up in your DMs in the first place. Like that, I think, is just low-hanging fruit for poor Christian culture.
Yeah. And you can walk through whether she's dominating unhealthily or you're passive. Like, you could walk through that. And
but that's just that's a relationship.
Yeah.
Figuring out flaws.
She might be overcompensating because you're not leading. Or she might be domineering and she needs to work on that. Like, it goes both ways.
Yeah.
But
I feel like too, like, spiritual maturity, I think, is a weird conversation on my end. Because like Jaena and I, like, we went to seminary for like years. Yeah. And so like when we talk about like there is a huge discipleship problem of young adult men in the church. Like there, you can look at the stats on it. And so like as a young adult woman coming into the church, there's a very stark reality, especially as someone who like has a master's degree, that I will always have more knowledge than any man I could possibly find like in the church. I will probably have more knowledge with them. And so like not equating knowledge about scripture or about God to spiritual maturity or to being equally yoked, but looking at, can this person run the same pace that I'm running to where I don't have to slow down? They don't have to know everything that I know, but are they willing to keep up and are they able to keep up, and then kind of going from there, but not like using education as a way to like, because I think like if you're a girl coming to Oasis, it's really easy to see a bunch of guys in the room, and like it's probably like there might be a little bit of a difference in like knowledge depending on like how involved in a small group you are, like if you serve and all of that. But look, like, can they keep up with you? Are they willing to like keep diving into who God is and all of that?
Yeah. To just keep us moving, to try and not get too long. One of the things that I'll just add from a male perspective is it is different. Like if you hear these statistics, there's a lot of hope for you. Like
that's true.
You are vastly outnumbered when it comes to Christian women in the church. And if you show up at Oasis, our numbers are about this. They're about 7 to I would probably say 6 to 4 depending on the night. But like there's good hope for you. But proceed with caution. That's what I try to encourage our males in, because you get gunslinging guys out there who are just asking out constantly because they because and I understand, like, they don't see anything wrong with it because I'm just trying to be intentional. I'm trying to, and like this one didn't work, so I'm going on to this one. But on the other side of every one of those invitations is a human being, and you want to be able to be wise in the way and mature in the way that you. So yes, should you initiate if you're single and you're desiring? Yeah, go ahead. Like as a guy, shoot your shot. Right? There's plenty of options, but yet do it with kindness and compassion and consideration for the community that you're a part of.
I think that's good. I'll breeze through this one real quick, but like one of the last main challenges I think our community have is just the pressure of culture, and just like we had a whole conversation last week about like how God views marriage and how God views sex, and it is good. But culture and media, what we see and what we hear just always goes against that for the most part. And so like just what streaming services, things that you watch, things that you listen to, just be really careful with that. It directly challenges your assumptions of who God is and how he has created you and how he's created other people. But as we wrap up, what does it look like? Brendan, you can't answer this one. I'm sorry. What does it look like to like use the gift of singleness amidst the challenges of culture, the internal, external pressure that we feel going on?
Ooh, there's a lot of questions in that one question. Since we just talked about culture, I'll stick with that. Recognize that that's a challenge. I think it's also okay to recognize that you're a human being with a body that functions with hormones and know that and take proper precautions to care for yourself well.
Yeah.
And to protect yourself well. And so the things you engage in might not seem that negative or that explicit, or maybe you're not watching pornography, but is the book you're reading leading your body to make changes that it wants to make? So just like recognizing and being aware and having some grace for yourself while also setting up healthy boundaries for yourself, whether that's as an individual or in dating relationships even. Just caring for yourself well. Well, that's part of spiritual maturity too.
I think I am going to add something into this, even though I'm not a single person. But like, one of the things is in Matthew 3, you see, Matthew 4, you see Jesus is being led into the wilderness to be by the Spirit to be tempted. And it's in that place of temptation that he actually is refined and there's maturity. So like in the midst of singleness, are there temptations for you that you are really, really prevalent? For sure. Yeah. And yet, by the power of the Spirit, as we lean into God's grace, we can overcome temptation because he always provides a way out that we can grow through that. And so, you're like, oh, how do I navigate culture? And are there for sure. Yet, if you learn to navigate those healthily by God's grace, man, you will be better on the other side because of it. And so it becomes, how does it a gift? Oh, I have to face more temptation? Yes. But I can grow stronger in my dependence on the Lord.
Yeah, that's so good.
I think, I would just say, like, you can't be single alone. One, you need community, you need friends, you need people that are going to give you life and love you well and support you. Nobody functions well in isolation. Even married people in isolation are not healthy. But the other thing too is like, yes, you need to rely on the Holy Spirit. I think something God's been teaching me over this past year is like, I grew up going to a Christian school where everybody just talked about how much they hated being single. I was like, I don't want to become that. And so I just never talked about how hard it was to be single. And then I realized by internalizing all of that, I never allowed God to carry the weight he was supposed to carry. And I got tired and exhausted from carrying the weight of singleness myself. And so just as a married person needs to have God leading their marriage relationship, a single person needs to have God leading their singleness. And so allow the Holy Spirit to equip you and to empower you and all of that. And you're not alone. Hang out with people.
Yeah. And use your community. Yeah. Like I have had seasons of community that was very couple heavy and seasons of community that was single people heavy. And both of those have been incredibly beneficial and encouraging in different ways. There are things I learned from my married couple friends that I can't learn from a single friend. And there's a solidarity in singleness together that my married friends can't understand. And so having both of those, and whether that's friendships or Bible studies that are mixed, or just even being part of different areas of the church where you get to interact with people in different stages of life, like that is for your benefit. And you can also be a resource to other people too.
Well, I would even go a step further. Like then some of the things you talked about for singleness, like being a part of the church, I think we sometimes negate the beauty of what that can actually mean. Like you are connected to this group of people who have varieties of skills and giftings and passions and resources. Tap into that.
Yeah.
Your car breaks down. Who can you call to come help? So you don't have to figure it out alone. Like that's what it means to be a part of a community too. Like you're trying to figure out like how to cook that meal, right? Like who can you invite over to come cook that meal with you? Like that's inviting in community and allowing them to offer things to you and being receptive to that is also a really beautiful part of that.
That's good.
Yeah. That's good. And I think we're at time, but I'm
sure we could keep going, but
for sure.
It's good. It's good. Good stuff.
Probably do 4 or 5 podcasts.
This is part 1 of 8.
All right. Peace out.
Bye.